Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have an early impression video on a house I've never discussed on the channel. So this is actually a first for Channel Ram. And this is from the house of Roberto Greco. And this is called Rauque, something like that. Sorry to all my French speakers out there. They're probably like, my ears. Yes, Rauque is how I'm going to pretend to, like I know how to pronounce that. But I'll tell you what, I got a chance to wear this to bed last night. I am wearing it again today. Not really as my scent of the day, but just on the wrist. I'll show you my scent of the day because I actually think it complements this pretty well. So I'm spraying them in different spots, but I'm going to do some fresh applications here. Sorry, the sprayer on this is just kind of leaking out basically, but you can see a pretty decent application there. I've got about a 4-hour dry down here. I wore it to bed last night. That's about as much wearing as I'm going to get out of something like this for my channel, especially since there's so many things I also want to discuss. But man, the first time I smelled this, I was like, wow, this is maybe even in competition for best scent of the year of 2023. I think Dessandra's was released in January of 2023. I think this was released sometime towards the middle or the end of 23. But this is definitely in competition with Dessandra for scent of the year, in my opinion. It does have that limited edition stigma because they only made, from my understanding, they made 500 bottles and they sold out like that. So then they came back and said, okay, we're going to do 100 more bottles and that's it, no more. And so this limited edition thing kind of kicks in. And I think it sold for about $265 for 80 mil. So not terrible, but still pretty expensive for 80 mils of fragrance. So it almost, I don't know how I feel about those limited edition releases because many of them turn out to be not that good. It's almost like, you're watching the Home Shopping Network or something and you get that guy on there or gal who's like, act now, don't let future regret or doubt creep in, only 500 bottles, act now. And frag heads are like, I gotta buy it. And so most of them end up kind of being this one is a 2 thumbs up. So like I said, 500 bottle limited edition, one of the few limited edition releases from a house like this that I think is actually worth it. And it's a shame because this is quite an impressive piece of work, both in terms of how it smells and the imagery it conveys. So from my limited knowledge of the house of Roberto Greco, just what I've picked up over the last year or so, because before this, I didn't know anything about it until people really started talking about Rauque. And so he is basically a photographer. So he's done photographs of perfumery bottles and adverts for a lot of big name brands. And he decided, screw it, I'm going to kind of do my own thing. So let me start with the imagery, because I think the imagery of Rauque is pretty damn impressive. So Rauque is basically like a French word for horse. Not like horse and buggy, or I'm going to go ride my horse, but like sort of my voice is hoarse, and it can also mean like rasping, or there's certain imagery with the scent in my mind, and the pandemic as it was thought of course, in 2020 and 2021. And this was created in 2020, or this, even though it was released in 2023, Roberto Greco says that the idea was formed in 2021, and in the setting of the fragrance is basically 2021, where there were lockdowns and people wearing masks and stuff like that. So this raspy voice, could be thought of as citizens maybe screaming to themselves in their flat out of boredom or loneliness because they were locked down, or it could be, their voice is hoarse because of the mask that was kind of blocking their, and you're like, what did you say? And they're like, so even though it was proven that many of those ridiculous, just, paper masks did absolutely nothing to stop the spread of anything, unless you were wearing like an N95 mask and you knew how to properly put it on, or you had some professional actually put it on your face, it did absolutely nothing. It's like, thinking when you fart, no one will smell it because you're wearing underwear. Just doesn't work that way, buddy. So it turned more into this like subservience to the political class and state, which side of the aisle you fall on, whether you wear a mask or you didn't wear a mask. And so it's interesting because here's a direct quote from Roberto Greco. He says, "In my Parisian flat, the time was numb. The days uncertain to the point of losing touch with our senses and with the others because they meant danger." And I'll tell you, it's interesting. I always think about that time, 2020, 2021, as being like the greatest psyop the world has ever, greatest psyop campaign of all time, of our lifetimes almost. And I think about how now in 2024, it's almost like everyone tries to act like it doesn't happen, or if you talk about it, it's like you're stigmatized or whatever. But it did happen. Most of us lived through it, unless you're very, very young. And, I almost see like kids in the future asking people who were alive, what was it like to live in the lockdown, kind of thing, unless we have to go through it again. But they almost made it seem like at the time, if you left your house, you were some sort of like mass murderer because you were going to kill grandma. Stay inside, don't kill grandma. And now if we remember those facts, they kind of stigmatize us for it. Well, so anyways, that's my understanding of what he's trying to say here. Otherwise, what's the point of mentioning 2021? And so he says, in that enclosure, I brought spontaneity into play to create a diversion and belie my thoughts. From this introspection, sometimes feverish, sometimes exhilarating, Rauque was born, a series of photographs blending suspended compositions and captured portraits. After all, freedom is not asked for, it is searched for and seized like an antidote. Antidote. Very, very interesting choice of words. So he says, with a glass plate device, I wish I had the bottle to show you guys, but it's pretty simple to just look it up. But he says, with a glass plate device that dissolves the contours of my subjects, I wanted to engage in a dialogue with absence and presence, indoor and outdoor. The obliteration of the object, which through the viewer's imagination takes shape, stimulating peripheral awareness. A struggle then begins between the image and its disappearance. By the way, I love the bottle. I love the imagery. So it's basically this flat bottle with like wavy lines, in the front. And it's almost like witnessing a mirage in the distance. And there's this feeling of, is it real? Is it in my head? That kind of back and forth. And you notice the line, a struggle between the image and its disappearance. Okay. So like a struggle where? Well, obviously in your mind, as you're cooped up in your flat, unable to leave because the world has this collective psychosis or whatever's going on in 2021. Okay. But it's interesting because if you look through the bottle, the wavery lines almost make what you're seeing behind it to be some sort of a distorted image. Are you really seeing what you think you're seeing through the glass? Is the glass distorting it? Is it a mirage? That kind of thing. So he basically goes on to say that the flat envelope wasn't enough for him to convey his thoughts, and so he started to add dimensions to his work, to his photographs, basically. So hence the full name of the fragrance, Rauque, l'objet parfumant, which basically means the perfuming object, if you will. So it isn't just a fragrance, it's an object with meaning and symbolism behind everything else, especially the bottle, and I really like that about it. So now he says that one of the starting points of the fragrance was, I would like the smell of a body about to implode. Wow, that can go a bunch of different directions. I mean, literally implode, sexually explode. What are you talking about? So this is how the olfactory exchange with Christopher Sheldrake started. It's very interesting because there is this mushroom earthiness that pervades the fragrance that my imagination can't help but actually picture a body literally exploding in the forest and then like settling on the forest floor and the coyotes taking the bones away and all that crazy stuff, being swallowed up by the mushroom and the mosses and, the leaves and the forest floor and, the thing that the forest does to normal animals when they die in the forest. The deer dies in the forest and, the vultures and the scavengers and everything take care of it. Deer didn't just sit there, right? And all that's left is what's left of the forest in that spot. And then I think of the lines in the bottle and the dimensions, and I imagine a man, I imagine me being trapped inside of this house or loft or apartment or condo, wherever you lived during the lockdowns, and literally wanting to explode from the insanity of the world, all around me or all around him. And then having to put on your smile and go out into the world. But enough living in fantasy land. Let's talk about how the fragrance smells. So for me, there is basically this old school Chypre vibe right from the very beginning. I wore as my scent of the day Burberrys for Men from 1981. Actually, this is the re-release from 1992, I think, the Royal Brands version, but it's still very, very good. And this is before all the craziness really started to happen in the last 10 to 15 years. But if you can find this fragrance or the first iteration from 81 that had the offset sprayer to the side, this is what the comparison to Rauque, I would say, would be a good comparison. Something like this from the 80s, okay? And so this was actually my scent of the day, and it reminded me a lot of the Roberto Greco. So Burberrys for Men uses like some spearmint in the top and some other things before it trails into that mossy verdant green, spicy chypre base, whereas Rauque uses this contrast of oily green and red notes. Imagine like this slightly ozonic, pissy, sour, like blackcurrant bud mixed with a pool of bright red intensity. It could be bright red because of the puddle of blood from the body literally exploding. It could be the color of anger as the man is like a prisoner in his own apartment or his own home due to the war perpetuated against him by his own government and corporations. However you choose to view it, that contrast of like oily notes floating on the top, while the others kind of sink to the bottom into this deep, rich, mysterious old school chypre created by the master, Christopher Sheldrake, is enough for me to be more than impressed on just 2 wears of this, okay? It's almost like a strange take on an aldehydic floral in the opening because you get this, so obviously I just did that fresh spray. You get this amazing floral accord right from the beginning, but in the past, there would be this big aldehydic opening. Think of some of the old Lanvin fragrances from the past or something like that, right? Big aldehydic florals. And here, instead of an old school aldehydic floral, you get this new age, almost like violet leaf accord that adds this ozonic aspect to the florals that you're smelling. But it's basically done in the same fashion, okay? Modernized, but done in the same fashion. And so there's this peachy, fruity, like suede notes from osmanthus that start to come through. And there's this blubbery feeling of the fragrance, almost like you're holding the uncooked mushroom. You know how mushroom, when they're uncooked, can have this weird, flappy, meaty, blubbery-like feel to them? And you contrast that with this ozonic sky and this open air, like you're in the forest, okay? You're inside, you're trapped, you want the mushroom to go inside of your loft and actually cook and stuff like that, but then you have that outdoor air accord that only Sheldrake has been able to create. I shouldn't say only Sheldrake has been able to create, but there's this feeling of open air that I get from other Sheldrake fragrances. Like if you've ever smelled Feeling Agile, which I need to review this. There's so many Sirs Lutons I need to just shut up and review. Stop focusing on other things and just review the damn Sirs Lutons. But if you've heard me describe Feeling Agile in the past, it's a perfume that has this sort of feeling of being in the forest, but also this feeling of huge open skies right above you. And it's one of my absolute favorites. It's a little bit different, of course, because there's much more tar and resins and stuff like that. Pine tar, sappiness, like touching the sap of a tree, smelling burning incense in the background. There's none of that in Rauque. But I love this type of perfumery, and Rauque would easily fit into a Sirs Luton bottle. I mean, easily. If Sirs Luton released what Rauque is as their own fragrance, most Sirs Luton lovers wouldn't even bat an eye. They would just go out and say, oh, this is a return to form, Sirs Luton, all this stuff, right? So the violet leaf adds this open air to go along with the forest floor that so impressed me with Sheldrake's previous works. And I find it very similar to, the Feeling Agile take on the open air with the foresty feeling, but done in a different way. Feeling Agile has the sap and the pine and the greenness and all that, the smoke in the background. Instead, we have this blubbery fungus in Rauque, oily top, which reminds me of the story from back in the day. One of the advantages of being a cook on, let's say, like a Royal Navy ship or a ship in Napoleon's army or something like that, or Navy, was that the cash from selling the fat slush that kind of went on top, they would scrape it from the cooking pots and sold it to things like tallow markers and stuff like that, and for other uses, and the cook got to keep that profit. That was one of the advantages of being a cook. That's where the term slush fund actually came from. And so imagine this fat floating on the top, and the cook scraping it off, or this like seal fat, this blubber that they used to use to create this Russian leather accord from back in the day. They actually used real seal fat in the old Russian, the actual creation of Russian leather. It's like a Picasso painting. You can't help but seeing the image of the actual body exploding laying on the forest floor with some blubber over here or there. Maybe some of my fellow Americans have a little more blubber than others by a few extra pounds. But then in this classic Sheldrake fashion, he's able to kind of take something so unique and strange and turn it around and bring it back home and bring it into something classical that and that just smells so. I think it's so classy and vintage, and I would wear the shit out of this if I had a bottle. And it is unique and strange to some folks, but he turns it into something classy in a way. And I think he does it using this floral accord that is out of this world good, absolutely out of this world good. It smells like there's things like rose. There is Narcissus Absolute. They list that, which sort of adds this stemmy floral smell, with touches of like green hay and tonka bean and, musty smelling white florals. But it's that, imagine taking a stem of a flower and, cracking that stem and getting that sort of hit of the greenery there. The daffodil feeling of the stem is very, very prominent. And that animalic floral combination starts to emerge. And, you get these notes of like decaying fruit start to come in and out. It could be from the Osmanthus Absolute. There could be some actual fruit notes here. After an hour or so, there's almost like this forbidden fruit feeling. And the combination, I would say, is very narcotic, okay? It becomes more classical as the hours tick by than one might expect from such an insane opening, There is no ylang listed. There's no ylang ylang. There's no orange blossom, but it smells like there's this giant classical French bouquet dead smack in the middle of this strange fragrance, like the man living in the strange world around him with all the crazy stuff going on. And so that weird floral note and where the green stemminess seems much more prominent than you might expect plays a big role. In fact, so much so, it almost feels like there's this galbanum-like feeling, like this green resin at the heart of it. Even though I don't think galbanum is listed, it gives me that feeling, If you smelled the galbanum in Val de Nuit parfum or something like that, that'll give you an idea. It's so green, and that's a classic green chypre as well. That could be a comparison as well. But this also goes more ambery. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there's almost this, what ends up happening is the fragrance turns into something that feels like it has the consistency and sometimes the smell of like this jelly or like fruit preserves, fruit conserve, okay? And so when you think of that oily fat floating on the top, like I mentioned, the cook using the slush fund, and making the leap to something like jelly or fruit conserve is not that hard to do, in my opinion. It almost becomes like it's the air you breathe inside of the forest. So the air is literally getting like gelatinous and hard to take into your lungs, but you can still move around in the forest. Only now it feels like you're moving almost like an astronaut might move on the moon or something like that, slow, and you're literally trudging through this sludge. It's like moving in slow motion. That's what the fragrance starts to feel like. And I like how that viscous feeling blends back and forth between this warm honey. There's this honeyed feeling, and then this jelly-like structure. And so if you look at the actual advertisement or photograph on Parfumo of the bottle, there's literally a picture of the bottle melting, like someone just took a blowtorch and they're trying to kind of melt it down. And it's a great image conceptually of the texture of the fragrance. It has that viscous, gelatinous texture where the oily fat kind of floats on top, and then underneath there's that green, leathery chypre. And so as the fragrance continues to dry, that's where that old leather smell really starts to present itself more and more. Like I said, I have a 4-hour dry down now. This is really where the leather starts to become more and more prominent. I get it much later into the dry down, say 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in. That's where that old leather starts to really present itself. And if you can imagine just being in the field, the patchouli and the mushrooms adding the earthiness, the whole drama where everything is happening, taking place. And you have like old leather stirrups and old leather saddles and old leather bracelets and everything just thrown across, like a battle was fought there. And all that's left, people have been taken away, and all that's left are these old leather goods from the battle. And you get this high quality, full grain leather, filled with defects and marks on the animal and all this stuff. And it just smells like it was just left in the forest for, years, maybe decades, and the heat has sort of dried the leather out. The cold has maybe cracked the leather, and all this different stuff that's happening. And so later on, the fragrance turns ambery. So you keep the leather, and then it starts to turn sort of ambery underneath, like the whole base is sitting on this sort of ambery, patchouli sort of base thing, with the green notes sticking around much longer than you would expect. And the florals almost turn like an animalic floral, you know? I reviewed an Aton fragrance from a month or two ago. I forgot what it was called. Maracinco. It was a Japanese name, but go to my Aton playlist and you'll find it. But he basically created this animalic floral, where the florals are what smelled animalic, and that's a little bit how the floral bouquet starts to smell in Rauque. It just has this sort of like, the florals have a sexualized aspect to them. There's something dirty. There's something maybe a little vile and off-putting to some, maybe attractive to others. There's just this there's this very artistic creation here. The dry down is just amazing. It's just an amazing fragrance. In fact, when I wore it to bed last night, I could smell it in the morning when I woke up. I knew the materials used were very high quality. And it almost feels like there's a tar aspect that starts to mix in. Not like pine tar, like in Feeling Agile, but like, tar, like labdanum tarry feeling. And it almost smells like there's this old school vintage oak moss dry down. I don't know how he did this without using oak moss, but fuck, it's impressive. It is impressive. I haven't been this impressed with a fragrance for a long, long time. I love this creation. It would definitely be full bottle worthy for me if I was still able to buy fragrances nowadays. So, I mean, Sheldrake does it again. Another all-time great. The man is just unbelievable. One of the greatest perfumers of his generation, in my opinion, and contender for Fragrance of the Year. So I definitely would like to smell more from the house. I'm fearful they will not live up to this because, damn, this was like very impressive work. So, yeah. Thank you, Allie, for sending this my way. If you have any experience with the house of Roberto Greco or Rauque in general, do let me know. Thanks for watching my early impression video. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll catch you guys next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.